He never fit the mold. Not in school, not in interviews, and certainly not in the glossy corridors of the Design Institute where suits walked fast and ideas got pitched before they were understood. He didn't pitch. He built, drew in margins, scribbled in silence. Where others raised voices to take credit for sketches made by interns, he was the shadow at the edge of the table, drawing with stained fingertips and an eye that didn't blink at failure. Where they saw a car, he saw a story, a silhouette that moved like breath, a curve that whispered speed instead of shouting it. He spent hours alone, not because he preferred loneliness, but because the rooms that mattered were often locked. And while they talked about inclusion, they guarded their ideas like heirlooms, unshared, inherited, protected. He wasn't from legacy. He was from rust and cracked sidewalks. He knew the sound of tools before he could spell torque, knew how to strip wire from speakers to fix the family radio, knew how to ride silence until it folded into focus. At 16, he took apart an old Civic engine just to learn. At 17, he designed his own suspension frame out of bike parts. At 18, he was denied 3 scholarships for lack of formal drafting experience. So he taught himself, at night, on borrowed laptops, with fingers that never stopped moving. By 22, he'd sent designs to 6 firms. Only one replied, a rejection template. But the 7th, the smallest, the least known, the most desperate for disruption, offered him an unpaid internship. He took it and changed their future. In 3 months, he had redefined the chassis structure for their mid-weight EV prototype. In 6, he reworked the dashboard to reduce glare and energy drain by 18%. They didn't understand how, but they saw results. They extended him, paid him, put him in rooms he wasn't meant to enter. He didn't speak much there, but when they passed him problems, he solved them in pen and paper before the coffee cooled. In time, the head of design began pausing by his desk, asking, listening. Respect followed. Slow, quiet, but real. By the time they greenlit Project LYNX, an ambitious, ultralight EV meant to break every aesthetic boundary, he was no longer the intern. He was the one they trusted when computers failed to imagine what the hand could feel. He designed the silhouette in 2 nights with jazz in one ear and engine specs in the other. They didn't believe it could be done until he made the model, until the wind tunnel test came back 42% more aerodynamic than the base competitor, until the exterior paneling shimmered like a blade in motion. He named it LYNX because it watched, waited, and then moved like nothing else. They approved it, built it, tuned it to his specs. When it was finished, they asked him to present. He refused, not out of shyness, out of memory. Memory of the first time he was mistaken for the janitor. Of the second time he was asked to wait outside his own studio because access is for employees only. Of the third time they said, "We're looking for someone more polished for this reveal." So he stepped back, let the car speak for him, until the morning of the expo, when the car was parked, glistening under early sunlight, drawing the attention it deserved, and he stood nearby, waiting to check the calibration on the active sensors, head down, back bent, holding a tablet like a technician, when the 2 men approached, when the phone started recording, when the words came, "That's not your car." He didn't flinch, because he knew the script, had lived it, but that didn't make it sting less, didn't make it right. He looked at the reflection in the glass. A machine born of his sketches, his dreams, his bloodless sacrifices, and let the moment stretch. Then the project director arrived, broke the scene with a single phrase, and the silence after that was the loudest thing he'd ever heard. After the moment went viral, the company scrambled. Not out of guilt, out of optics. They didn't apologize to him directly. Not the executives. Not the men who stood 2 feet away when the words were said and did nothing. Instead, they posted a vague tweet about respecting the creators behind innovation. A blog article appeared the next day, headlined, "Meet the Genius Behind the LYNX." He didn't write it. He didn't read it either, because he didn't need their words to validate what his sketches had already carved into steel. But still, something in him shifted. He designed for function, for efficiency, for movement. But now people wanted his name. They wanted to meet the man behind the design. And many were surprised. Some delighted. Some not. A popular car magazine ran a piece titled, "We expected an Elon, we got a DeAndre." It wasn't praise. It was permission coded in stereotype. But others saw him. Really saw him. Design students messaged him in droves. A teenage boy from Detroit sent him a photo of his notebook filled with chassis sketches and the message, "I didn't think people like us could build things like that." He answered every message. Not because he wanted fans. Because he remembered what silence felt like when you had questions and no one to ask. Back in the lab, the air changed. People passed by his desk slower now. A nod here. An awkward smile there. Respect, uneven, uncertain, began to bloom where dismissal used to grow. But for every open door, a new shadow formed. The senior consultant who casually asked if he'd really been the sole designer. The marketing VP who tried to add additional vision contributors to the site after the buzz started. The executive who suggested putting someone more brand neutral in the next press release. He didn't argue. He created. He buried the insult in his next blueprint. He poured the frustration into a new project, Lynx 2. Sleeker. Lighter. Built for silence. He spent nights alone in the workshop, just him and the hum of electric motors, his sketch pad covered in graphite fingerprints. He taped up new outlines to the wall, models that bent light and carved shadows into curves. Shapes that didn't just move, they whispered. By week 6, he had a working prototype. No one had asked for it. No one had approved it. But he built it anyway. Because sometimes you don't wait for permission. You design forward. And when the board caught wind, they came down to see it in person. Crowded his workshop. Stood silently, arms crossed, eyes skeptical. Until he pressed the ignition. And the machine purred to life like thunder in velvet. Silence. One of them whispered, "That's beautiful." He didn't reply. Didn't need to. Because the machine spoke louder than their hesitation ever could. They approved the next phase. Offered him a new title. He declined the fancy name. Took the tools. Kept working. He wasn't designing cars anymore. He was designing legacy. Not for fame. For the next kid who looked like him and needed a blueprint for believing. There's a moment just before a design becomes real when everything could fall apart. In the cold precision of the wind tunnel, you can't fake vision. You can't charm aerodynamics. You either built it to move or you didn't. And this machine, Lynx 2, was built to move. He stood behind the glass as the fans ramped up, a steady we're building into something guttural. The prototype waited on its platform, silent and still, like an animal seconds before the hunt. The lighting was sterile, but the car shimmered anyway, midnight black, edges polished so fine they looked invisible in motion. The engineers logged their readings. Yaw, drag, downforce. He didn't blink. He'd lived every line of this machine before it existed. It wasn't just an upgrade from Lynx I. It was a reply. A rebuttal. A declaration written in magnesium and carbon fiber. It was what happened when a mind that had been overlooked finally decided to stop asking to be seen. The data streamed in. The numbers didn't lie. Best-in-class drag coefficient. Unheard of lift-to-weight ratio. A sound profile so low it didn't just qualify for silence, it redefined it. Behind him, murmurs started. Not praise. Not yet. Just confusion that something this right came from someone they'd once dismissed. And then a slow turning. One by one, the others shifted their stance. Crossed arms uncrossed. Skepticism cracked. Eyes widened not just at the design, but at him. They weren't watching the car anymore. They were watching the one who imagined it. When the test ended, the applause didn't come. It didn't need to. Silence had always been his arena. Back in the hallway, he walked past interns who stopped talking when he passed. He knew what they were thinking. He's the guy. He kept walking. He'd learned to carry recognition the way he carried rejection, with composure. Later that week, the board invited him to present to investors. They wanted him to sell. To speak in sound bites. He said no. Not out of pride. But because his work didn't belong in boardrooms. It belonged in motion. Instead, he proposed something else. A private reveal. No press. No branding. Just movement. And they agreed reluctantly. The test track was booked. Dawn light. One camera. One car. And him. He arrived first. Parked the car himself. Didn't wait for a valet. Didn't need a handler. This was his design. His hands. His soul. He walked the perimeter. Ran his palm along the spine. Whispered something only the machine could hear. Then drove. The camera captured everything. The curve of the wheel under his control. The stillness of his expression as velocity danced around him. The proof not in speech, but in speed. When the video was published, it didn't just go viral. It ignited. 100 million views in 4 days. Not because of the car. Because of the truth behind the car. People finally saw what innovation looked like when it wasn't packaged the usual way. It wasn't whiteboard meetings or LinkedIn posts. It was stained hands, worn-out hoodies, and eyes that refused to look away from impossible. He didn't post a follow-up. Didn't comment. He let the silence do the work. And the industry responded. Job offers. TV segments. Magazine features. He turned down most of them. He was already building again. Already dreaming something faster. Something quieter. Because for him, the destination had never been attention. It had always been the next design. He drove past his old neighborhood one morning. Not in the Lynx 2, not in any car he designed, just a beat-up hatchback with a dent in the door and rust around the wheel wells. A car that didn't attract cameras or questions. A car like the ones he used to sketch in notebooks while his friends played ball under the overpass. He parked near the curb where he once waited for the bus, headphones in, pencils tucked into his jacket pocket, using every red light as a chance to imagine shapes that didn't exist yet. The playground across the street was cracked now. The swings rusted. But the sound was the same, kids yelling over traffic, dogs barking down alleyways, bass lines thudding from distant apartments. He sat there for a long while, watching. Not because he missed it. Because he wanted to remember who he'd had to become to escape it. He got out and walked. The neighborhood knew his face now. Not everyone. But some. The barbershop owner waved. A boy stopped on his bike and asked, "Aren't you the car guy?" He smiled. Nodded. The kid asked what it felt like to build something nobody believed you could. He said nothing. Just pointed to the street where the boy had laid his bike down. There, he seemed to say, that's where it starts. That night, he returned to the studio. The engineers had updated the test metrics on his new frame concept. He ignored them. Focused instead on a piece of paper he'd pulled from his coat. A drawing. One of his oldest. Lines smudged from age and friction. An impossible car sketched in graphite and hope. He pinned it to the wall. Not as nostalgia. As proof. Proof that the future had always lived in the hands of those who weren't handed blueprints. He began shaping a new model. Smaller. Lighter. Even quieter. A city car. Affordable. But still sculpted in beauty. He pitched it at the monthly review meeting. The board looked confused. One asked why he designed something unpremium. Another said, that's not your segment. He said nothing. Just placed the model in the center of the table. Let it speak. One executive leaned in and whispered, you really want to put your name on this? He nodded. Because that was the point. It wasn't about being seen anymore. It was about seeing the ones still stuck in silence. The proposal passed. Barely. But it passed. And that was enough. He worked night shifts again. Not because he had to. Because that's when the building was quiet enough to hear his thoughts echo back through the steel. His assistant asked once why he didn't have a luxury car of his own. He said, because I'm still building the one that matters. She didn't understand. Not then. But she would. When the city car was released, lightweight, cost-efficient, silent as breath, it didn't explode online. It trickled. Into hands that needed it. Into neighborhoods with broken sidewalks and no charging stations. And when someone posted a clip of it driving through a rainstorm with his name etched quietly under the trunk, the caption read, designed by someone who never forgot where he came from. The launch of the city car didn't come with fireworks. There were no celebrities posing beside it, no champagne flutes raised at black tie galas. It rolled out quietly like everything he built into spaces that had been waiting for something different. Something real. He didn't attend the official press unveiling. He went to the warehouse. To work. Because every launch was a beginning, not an end. But this time, the noise found him anyway. A viral clip had surfaced, one that wasn't from the studio or a marketing team or a brand ambassador. It was shot on a phone in a back alley where a street vendor had parked her new city car beside a folding table of fried empanadas. Rain fell softly. The car's lights glowed through steam and puddles. And she said simply, "This is the first thing I've owned with my name on it that didn't make me feel small." That quote was everywhere the next day. He read it in silence, printed it, taped it to the inside of his workshop locker. He didn't need to be in commercials. He needed more of that. But not everyone celebrated. A legacy automaker filed a patent dispute claiming that the rear curve of the city car bore resemblance to one of their concept designs from a decade ago. They sent a legal notice. Subtle, threatening, coded in politeness but forged in intimidation. His company asked him to respond. He didn't. He walked into a meeting 2 days later and rolled a sheet of acetate across the table. Underneath, His first sketch of the curve, dated, signed, stained with coffee rings. No one could argue with the paper. It was older than their prototype. He'd drawn it before they even knew his name. The suit from legal said that shuts it down. He didn't smile. He just went back to his desk and drew something newer. But the challenge didn't stop there. The more successful his work became, the more people tried to rewrite the story. They framed it in ways he didn't recognize. They said, from obscurity to luxury. They said, a black genius finally gets his break. They said, the car no one believed in. But he had believed. That was the part they kept missing. He believed in every line, every curve, every sleepless night spent sketching with hands numb from cold and failure. They tried to fit him into a narrative they could sell. He didn't let them. Instead, he released a short video, just him sitting beside the prototype of a new model. No music, no narration, only captions written in his own hand. This design wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about making space for those who never got the chance to be right. That clip went viral in a different way. Not trending, transforming. Design schools began using his sketches as case studies. High schools printed his story into their art classrooms. Mothers told their sons, you don't have to look like them to build like him. He kept working. And every time someone tried to steal the story, he'd give them something too honest to twist. Not with anger, with presence. Because the one thing they couldn't take was the blueprint of his soul, drawn long before they ever cared who held the pencil. He walked the exhibit floor slowly. It was a retrospective 10 years of innovation, 10 cars, 10 moments when the impossible became inevitable. Cameras flashed. Names were whispered. But when he passed, the noise softened. As if something about him commanded stillness, not spectacle. Each display had a title. Lynx Eye, Lynx 2, Kilo, Halo, Arc. Each had a story written beside it. But none captured why they were made. Only how. He moved past them until he reached the newest one. A model called Root. It was matte white, compact, balanced, designed for simplicity but coated with complexity. The kind of car that didn't dominate a street but belonged to it. His hands had shaped every contour. Not to impress. To serve. The placard below the car was simple. Lead designer, D. King. There was no bio. No backstory. Just a QR code that led to a page with a single sentence. I built what I needed when I had nothing. That sentence had already been shared 12 million times. In classrooms. In boardrooms. In jails. He watched a young girl approach the car, maybe 11, with wide eyes and a pencil behind her ear. She circled it, touched the edge, pulled out a notebook and started sketching. He didn't speak, just nodded, because he knew that look. It was the look of someone who had just seen permission. Later that day, he left through a side door. The exhibit team had asked him to speak during the closing ceremony. He declined, not because he didn't have something to say, because he'd already built it. Outside, the street was loud again, but this time he wasn't walking alone. A quiet movement had formed around his silence. Designers who didn't wear blazers. Engineers who worked 2 jobs to pay for night school. Artists who used bus transfers as bookmarks for sketchbooks. They called him mentor, blueprint, proof. And still, he didn't center himself. He centered the work. 1 month later, a car rolled out of production that would change everything again. It wasn't fast. It wasn't sleek. It was reachable. And it had a console screen that opened with a message instead of a logo. The message was written in the same hand he'd used on his earliest sketches. This was made for you. Because I know what it feels like to be told. That's not your car. He never signed it. Didn't need to. Everyone knew who built it.